33 entries, 7 levels. This is an iceberg of some of the most disturbing yet nostalgic moments from our childhood that left a lasting impression. We'll begin with some internet moments that are scary but strangely nostalgic, and then move on to the truly unhinged ones that take things up a notch. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Dark Harvest, Invader Zim. Invader Zim was a 2001 cartoon that aired on Nickelodeon and was already widely regarded as not very kid-friendly. Its entire premise was horror comedy and dark fiction, but once blended in with cutesy characters, the horror aspect of it was definitely toned down a bit. However, there were certain scenes in the show that screamed disturbing and were definitely not safe for children to watch. One such scene that probably a lot of us can still remember is the organ harvesting scene from the 4th episode of Season 1. Zim, the main character of the show, gets a disease known as head pigeon at school. This prompts him to go to the head nurse's office, but is kind of worried she'll find out he's not human. Which he isn't. He's an alien known as Urkin. In order to not get his identity exposed at school, Zim decides to literally, in all senses of the word, harvest other children's organs. He uses an alien machine to extract their organs and replaces them with tech gadgets. For example, he removes one girl's organ and replaces it with a gaming device called the Game Slave. Zim goes on a rampage targeting everyone in the school. Meanwhile, he's pursued by Dib, the supposed antagonist of the series, who tries to protect the remaining students from Zim's horrific onslaught. Despite Dib's best efforts, he ultimately fails. Every student ends up having at least one of their organs replaced. The episode concludes with Zim replacing one of Dib's organs with a device called a mooing sound can. To make matters worse, Dib gets blamed for everything and is shunned by the school staff. Five Nights at Freddy's.
Me mateys! It be your favorite swashbuckling buccaneer, Foxy, the Pirate Fox!
Five Nights at Freddy's isn't necessarily targeted at kids, despite featuring kid-friendly themes like animatronics and cartoonish pizza places. Still, that hasn't stopped people from playing the game, which is exactly why FNAF has become one of the biggest horror game franchises in the world, even going as far as to getting its own mega-hit horror film last year. That said, no one can deny the impact the original FNAF had on the world. The first game, released in 2014, had everyone hooked.
Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage.
Everybody, my name is Markiplier, and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's 4.
Massive OG YouTubers like Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, and PewDiePie jumped on the bandwagon to play the game exactly as the creators intended. It gained so much traction in such a short time that nearly everyone formed some sort of emotional attachment to the game, whether from playing it themselves or watching others play. However, despite the sentimental value, the game was and still is anything but wholesome. It's an exceptionally scary experience revolving around a series of encounters with murderous humanoid animatronics in a pizza place called Freddy Fazbear's. The game is characterized by intense jump scares, dark backstories, and absolutely demonic-looking creatures. Add in the unnerving soundtrack and the high stakes tied to each objective, and it's a whole new level of unhinged that just doesn't compare to anything else. Herobrine. For anyone who's ever been a fan of Minecraft, the most iconic game to ever grace the internet, the legend of Herobrine is practically unavoidable. The whole mystery surrounding this alleged secret character began with a 2010 post on 4chan, where a user claimed to have encountered a strange, eerie figure in a Minecraft server during the game's alpha phase. They added screenshots of a very desolate Minecraft-style area with the character standing menacingly on the left. The character, which later came to be known widely as Herobrine, was characterized as being exactly like the default Minecraft skin Steve, but with eyes that lacked pupils, essentially making it a textbook horror entity. The post was so compelling that for a long time fans believed Herobrine was real. They fully believed that Mojang, the game's developers, had quietly slipped him into the game without anyone noticing. Some even speculated that it was the ghost of Minecraft creator Notch's deceased brother haunting the game. Streamers like Copeland and Patamus took the legend even further and spun their own theories. They staged live-streamed encounters with the character and basically made Herobrine an actual thing. Eventually, the whole thing snowballed to the point where Minecraft developers themselves leaned into the myth. They began to subtly hint at Herobrine's existence with creepy, tongue-in-cheek patch notes and certain updates. While, in the end, Herobrine might just be a creepypasta, he's still one of the most legendary figures to ever emerge from the Minecraft universe, and arguably one of the most famous non-character characters in the entire gaming world. Charlie Charlie Challenge. Kids tend to get down to all kinds of strange but surprisingly creative antics. They come up with the wildest games, often with oddly intense stakes. Take the Charlie Charlie game, for example. Most of us have probably heard of it, and let's be honest, many of us have played it at least once. And if you have, you've likely had to face the consequences. The consequences here aren't exactly life-threatening, but the scare you'd get after playing was unmatched by anything else. The game was played by simply balancing pencils on a piece of paper, whispering questions into the void, and waiting for a supernatural yes or no to appear. It was the kind of thing that could send shivers down your spine, even if you didn't entirely believe it. What made it so terrifying wasn't just the setup, but the psychological tension it created. Everyone would sit in absolute silence, holding their breath, while the pencils wobbled slightly. Even the smallest movement felt like proof of something sinister. While the entire thing was literally balanced on a little physics, it was still a scary experience that left most of us dreading sleep time. Cue the sleepless nights and the endless paranoia of, what if it was real?
Heart is beating so fast. No, there's no one in here. Okay. This is stupid. This is a stupid challenge. Stupid. Don't. What the?
Looking back, the Charlie Charlie game was a masterclass in how simple ideas can create huge scares. It's a perfect example of how kids, in their strange but brilliant way, can turn even the most basic objects into tools of terror. There were times when these so-called harmless games escalated to the point where certain religious groups officially labeled them as demonic. They accused the games of inviting spirit possessions or corrupting the soul. In some cases, things got so out of hand that they even triggered mass hysteria. For instance, in Libya, there were reports of 5 deaths allegedly linked to the Charlie Charlie game, which led to the government banning it outright. The panic and notoriety surrounding the game weren't just limited to one place. Similar stories popped up worldwide and made it a much bigger thing than it actually was, essentially sensationalizing it. Level 2. Scary Maze. If you were on the internet during the early 2000s, chances are you've come across the infamous Scary Maze game. Everyone knows how unhinged the early internet era was. It was the time when everyone was busy pranking each other with ridiculously simple yet hilariously traumatizing stuff. One such sensation was the Scary Maze game. For anyone who's still blissfully unaware, the Scary Maze game was a deceptively innocent-looking browser game. The premise was painfully straightforward. You had to guide a tiny dot through a series of increasingly narrow mazes without touching the walls. As easy and simple as it sounds, there's a kick. like most similar stuff has. Once players get into the game deeply and start focusing intensely on keeping that little dot on track, the game will suddenly ambush them. It'll pop up a terrifying image of a creepy face, usually Linda Blair from The Exorcist, accompanied by an ear-splitting scream. Usually the way this game circulated was people would trick their friends and close ones into playing it. Friends, siblings, and even parents were fair game. However, with what we know about it now, this innocent prank ruined countless computer screens and friendships. The scare was so sudden and intense that people's reactions became a whole genre of internet comedy. Early YouTube was filled with compilation videos of people screaming, falling out of their chairs, or even smashing their keyboards in terror. Scary Maze became such a massive thing when it first came out that it was practically a rite of passage for internet users back then. Of course, not everyone found it funny. Some people complained about how it was borderline traumatic, especially for kids who didn't know what they were getting into. The game's shock value was way out of proportion for what it was trying to do. But at the same time, that's also why it became such a legendary piece of internet history. Goosebumps. For a series that was marketed as a children's anthology, Goosebumps was anything but that. It was based on R.L. Stine's books of the same name and had a run from 1995 to 1998, spanning over 4 seasons. While the books were already nightmare fuel for many kids, the live-action adaptation somehow managed to take the horror to an entirely new level. And the fact that this was all specifically targeted at children just made the show 10 times more horrifying. Despite that, Goosebumps became one of the most widely watched shows on television at the time. Kids couldn't stop watching it, even if it meant sleeping with the lights on for weeks afterward. The show's success didn't make it any less traumatizing, though. If anything, its visual storytelling made everything feel disturbingly real. The props didn't just look like props, they looked like actual cursed objects dug out of somewhere sinister. It featured hyper-realistic masks and unnerving, convincing blood. Additionally, with a plethora of creepy dolls and cursed objects, the show's production design pulled no punches. Each episode carried its own brand of psychological horror. It tackled all sorts of disturbing stories, everything from haunted ventriloquist dummies, slappy, to shape-shifting monsters disguised as innocent neighbors. In true Goosebumps fashion, the endings of these episodes weren't too comforting either. They almost always left viewers with a lingering sense of unease and sometimes even disgust. What made Goosebumps truly unforgettable, though, was how it walked the razor-thin line between thrilling and terrifying. This aspect of it alone made it truly nostalgic for generations to come. Kids knew they'd be scared out of their minds, but they kept coming back for more. The show introduced an entire generation to the idea that horror could be both fun and utterly horrifying. It ultimately solidified its place as a cornerstone of 90s pop culture and is still remembered for its impact. Bloody Mary.
Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Alright, well I guess nothing happened. That proof that it's fake. Alright, I want you guys to comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know what you think and if you want more videos. See you guys next week.
Like Charlie Charlie, Bloody Mary was another ritual that became popular in the early internet era because of the horror implications behind it. Although the legend itself is as old as time, its modern version took on a life of its own. Many people dived into the hype train without having any real understanding of its history. The Bloody Mary myth has long been associated with several Marys throughout history. Some believe it stems from Queen Mary I of England. She was widely known as Bloody Mary due to the vicious persecutions of countless Protestants during her reign. Others tie it to Mary Worth, a figure in folklore who was rumored to be a cruel witch with a lot of blood on her hands. The last possible candidate for the role could be Elizabeth Bathory, a horrific figure in history who became widely known for killing 660 women and bathing in their blood. In the current era, though, the Bloody Mary ritual has basically become a sleepover staple. The game typically involves standing in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room, usually illuminated by candles for that extra creepy touch, and chanting Bloody Mary a set number of times. The most commonly accepted number is 3, but 47 also works apparently. According to legend, if done correctly, her ghostly figure would appear in the mirror behind you.
Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
If the name is chanted more times than required, she's reported to reach out of the mirror screen to harm you. It doesn't require any special setup or props, just a mirror and some courage, or peer pressure. Kids would dare each other to try it. They'd often supplement their own experiences with exaggerated stories about what happened to a friend of a friend. And even though most people knew deep down it wasn't real, the sheer anticipation was enough to have them try it once. There is, however, this phenomenon called the Troxler effect. While the ritual itself is obviously not real, the human mind tends to work in strange ways. If you stare into a mirror under dim lighting for too long, your brain can start distorting the image on said mirror. It's essentially an optical illusion where your mind tunes out anything stationary and starts filling in the gaps with its own creepy creations. It doesn't make Bloody Mary real, but it doesn't make the experience any less terrifying either. Kuyang Daya. The Kuyang is a widely believed myth in Southeast Asian folklore, particularly in Daya mythology. It tells the story of a beautiful woman whose head is detached from her body with her internal organs dangling beneath her. The Kuyang is said to prey on young children and pregnant women, and is known for feeding on their blood and using dark magic to achieve her sinister goals. Because of her malevolent nature, locals often perform rituals and take protective measures to ward her off and keep her from entering their homes. However, what gives the Kuyang a sense of nostalgia is not the legend itself, but a viral video that surfaced on 2011. Titled Kuyang Daya, the YouTube video garnered over 900,000 views and sparked widespread fear. The video features two Indonesian men casually talking, but their conversation isn't what makes the video terrifying, it's what's shown on screen that leaves viewers unsettled. The footage depicts what appears to be an animal locked in a cage. The animal is possibly a dog and is clearly seen wearing an eerie ghost white mask. The mask is unnervingly realistic. It has moving eyes and a contorting mouth that makes the creature look deeply unnatural, while also making it look real for some reason. Its movements are weirdly contorted and disjointed, which makes it hard to believe it's just some touched-upon video of a dog. The video ends with a blue screen. To this day, it's unclear whether the footage was an elaborate, cleverly edited hoax or an actual supernatural occurrence. Because the video is titled Kuyang Daya, many believe this is the closest recorded encounter with the previously mentioned mythical being. Coraline. Coraline is a stop-motion animation movie that's probably carved into the minds of every child who's watched it. It's a dark fantasy animation based on a novella that was released in 2009. On the surface, it seems harmless enough, bright, cutesy visuals accompanied by a fun, whimsical soundtrack. But beneath that, there's something disturbingly dark about the film that taps into the deeper corners of childhood fears, both in its premise and in real life. The story of Coraline seems deceptively simple. It follows a lonely girl who discovers a parallel universe in her new home that holds everything she's ever dreamed of. This newfound reality of hers offers her loving parents, good food, and plenty of attention. But just as she's about to truly embrace this other world, she realizes how wrong her perception was. The world begins to reveal its sinister side, and Coraline is forced to accept that her other parents are far from normal. They and their button eyes represent something much darker. Most disturbingly, her other mother becomes a twisted version of desire, manipulation, and control. The imagery in Coraline is what makes it especially haunting. The infamous button eyes are a small detail that's impossible to ignore. It's almost like the movie knew exactly how to burrow into your brain and never let go. The entire film is a series of you'll never forget moments that stick with you in the most uncomfortable way. But perhaps the most disturbing part of Coraline is its message. Some argue that the movie is a metaphor for abuse, while others call it what it is, a depiction of what happens when we try to find a perfect world that doesn't exist. Level 3. The original Lights Out short film. The original Lights Out was a 3-minute horror short released on YouTube in 2013 by Swedish director David F. Sandberg. The video was so unsettling and haunting that it quickly gained worldwide acclaim and eventually led to the creation of a full-length film in 2016. Despite being only 3 minutes long, the video was probably one of the most eerie things to ever grace the internet. It features highly intense cinematography that completely pulls viewers into the story. Almost as if they're stepping into the main character's shoes themselves. The premise of the short is extremely simple, but as effective as it could get. It begins with a woman turning off the light in her hallway. However, she realizes that the instant she does, a strange, grotesque humanoid creature begins to creep toward her. As soon as she senses its presence, she turns the light back on and decides to leave it on for the rest of the night. She then goes back into her room and turns on her bedside lamp, but once she settles down on the bed, she begins to realize that something is horribly wrong and she's not safe. The tension builds slowly as the creature inches closer to her. The horror goes up tenfold when the light in the hallway flickers and then goes out completely, leaving both the woman and the viewers fully exposed to whatever horror is about to unfold. When the light comes back on, it offers a brief moment of false security which is taken away as quickly as it's given. The monster then emerges right by her bedside table instead of the hallway. It snuffs out the light from her bedside lamp, leaving both her and the viewers in pitch darkness. Sid's Mutant Toys Toy Story. Nothing about the movie franchise Toy Story should scream disturbing. After all, it's a series catered entirely to a younger audience. It's supposed to be bright, fun, and full of heartwarming moments. But that doesn't mean it's completely free of nightmare fuel. In fact, one of the most horrific yet iconic scenes in the entire franchise is the introduction of Andy's next-door neighbor, Sid Phillips, and his horrifyingly deformed mutant toys. When Buzz and Woody find themselves trapped in Sid's room, they stumble upon a collection of toys that are, well, different. All of these toys are disfigured beyond recognition and look like something straight out of an indie horror movie. Some of the most iconic toys in the scene include Babyface, a toy that has the body of a mechanical spider and the face of a one-eyed baby doll. It's just as creepy as it sounds. There's this one called Ducky, which is basically a weird contraption where a duck attached to the baby doll's body from Babyface. And of course, legs. Barbie legs awkwardly fused to a small fishing rod. These are just a few examples of the several featured in the film. Naturally, Buzz and Woody are terrified when they first encounter them. They even jump to the conclusion that the mutant toys are cannibals and try to escape them before they meet the same fate. However, it turns out these toys are actually kind and helpful. They've just been victims of Sid's cruelty, and they end up helping Buzz and Woody escape from the psychotic kid. Additionally, as scary as these marred toys are, it's their maker that comes across as the scariest. Sid is an absolutely unhinged kid with tendencies that are not normal for a child. He's cruel, violent, vicious, and doesn't leave anything unharmed. Some would call it creativity, but the way he mutilates his toys speaks another story entirely. Game Boy Camera. The Game Boy was Nintendo's handheld gaming console that hit the market in 1989. It became an instant hit and went on to become one of the most iconic handheld consoles of all time. For the most part, the Game Boy was as harmless as they come. After all, it was just a monochromatic gadget where kids played vintage games like Super Mario Land and The Legend of Zelda. It's safe to say that most of us had a nostalgic connection to it growing up. Unfortunately, the makers of the console had a different idea than to make the gadget a completely harmless little device for people to play games on. On the surface, there was nothing creepy or unnerving about the gadget, apart from this Easter egg one of its accessory gadgets contained. In 1998, Nintendo released the Game Boy Camera to go with the Game Boy. It was just a quirky little camera that could take black and white photos, let users edit them, and even work with a few games. But there was something far more unsettling buried within its interface. The camera's main menu looked pretty basic, kind of like the menu from a Pokemon game of that era. But one option stood out. It was labeled Run. At first, it seemed like every other generic camera option. Clicking on it usually did absolutely nothing. But every now and then, users were greeted with a strange animation of a map of Africa, along with the caption, "You are now crossing the equator." That wasn't the weirdest part, though. Occasionally, instead of the usual animation or nothing at all, Run would throw up creepy pixelated black and white pictures of distorted faces. These were images of random men and women, but they would have bizarre caricatures drawn on them. These faces were already pretty disturbing, but the drawing would make the faces look downright nightmarish. In text, it doesn't sound that bad, but seeing those warped faces pop up on the tiny monochrome screen was downright unsettling, especially when it happened out of nowhere. So, while the Game Boy itself was a piece of childhood nostalgia, the Game Boy Camera had this hidden, eerie element that definitely caught some users off guard. Clayton's Death, Tarzan. For a movie officially characterized as a comedy, there were certain scenes in the 1999 Tarzan that were anything but. For most of us, Disney's Tarzan had been a childhood staple. Watching Tarzan swing from tree to tree with the love of his life without giving in to normalcy. Essentially, the theme of the story hit hard. But despite how wholesome it was and how morally strong Tarzan's lessons were, it had some very dark elements in it that basically stayed with most of us into adulthood. Clayton, the movie's main antagonist, could be identified as one of the worst antagonists Disney has ever come up with. He was the polar opposite of what Tarzan embodied, and that basically became his downfall. On the surface, Clayton was presented as a civilized gentleman with societal values, but deep down he was far more beastly and savage than the animals he hunted. While his contrast to Tarzan is definitely worth diving into, that's not what makes him so disturbing. It's his death that truly cemented him as one of Disney's darkest characters. Clayton's death was hands down one of the most graphic and unsettling moments in any Disney movie. In the climax of the film, he and Tarzan have their final showdown. Things escalate quickly, and at the peak of their fight, Clayton accidentally falls from a massive tree and, well, dies. One would think he fell to his death, which in itself is disturbing as it is, but no. As Clayton falls from the trees, he gets stuck on a vine and inadvertently hangs himself to his death. The little glimpse of his machete falling to the ground while the camera pans to Tarzan's horrified face elevates the creepy factor to a max. What makes it even darker is that after everything Clayton did to Tarzan, destroying his home, killing his father figure, and hunting his friends, Tarzan still tries to warn and save him. That moment adds such a haunting layer to the scene and basically doubles down on the stark differences between the two characters. Valve intro. Since its founding in 1996, Valve has been the butt of countless jokes, and honestly, it makes sense. The gaming company has been such a massive part of so many childhoods, and still somehow manages to have a firm grip on the mainstream internet. With iconic games that are well over a decade old but still pulling in more players every day, Valve isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But let's be real, while some of their content is a bit creepy, Half-Life is the perfect example of nightmare fuel, Valve's real claim to unsettling fame is their iconic intro. The music alone is enough to give you chills. That ominous tune hasn't changed much in over 20 years. Even to this day, it has this way of making players feel uneasy. But honestly, it's not just the music that makes Valve intros so creepy, it's certain visuals that come with it. Take the first Valve logo from 1998, for instance. It's downright insane. In this intro, a man walks up to this weird-looking machine with a lever sticking out of it. He pulls the lever, puts his head under the machine, and gets a valve stuck on his head. Sure, it's creative, but it's also absolutely terrifying. Later intros tone things down a little. Instead of watching someone slap a valve onto their own skull, we got the Valve Guy. He's just a bald man with a red valve stuck on different parts of his face. Sometimes it's on his eye, other times it's on the back of his head. Still weird, but way less traumatizing. The unreleased Team Fortress 2 intro made the Valve logo even more unsettling. It starts like the usual one, showing the man with the valve on the back of his head, but after a few seconds, he slowly starts turning his head as if he's about to look directly at the viewer. The deliberate pace of the eerie silence is the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack is one of those shows that looks like a fun adventure story on the surface, but quickly dives into surreal, unsettling territory. The series aired from 2008 to 2010 and follows the story of Flapjack and Captain Knuckles. The show's titular character, Flapjack, is a wide-eyed and overly optimistic boy, and Captain Knuckles is his questionable mentor. It follows their adventures as they search for the mythical Candy Island. While this sounds like any standard cartoon series, don't let this particular one fool you. It's anything but cute and whimsical. What truly gives Flapjack its notoriety is not the premise, but its bizarre and often grotesque visuals. The show frequently shifted from its charming, hand-drawn style to hyper-detailed, unsettling close-ups that felt like something straight out of a nightmare. Whether it was Knuckles' decaying wooden teeth or the overly animated expressions of the townsfolk in Stormalong Harbor, the imagery could go from quirky to downright creepy in seconds. The story often had odd humor and eerie undertones. A lot of the times, the story had Flapjack and Knuckles stumble into situations that felt more like fever dreams than lighthearted adventures. They would come across so many unsettling characters and would get strange moral lessons. And while the show balanced whimsy and discomfort in a way few cartoons could replicate, it's unforgettable in the weirdest way possible. Slendytubbies. Games like Slendytubbies are prime examples of how, with enough creativity, something innocent can be turned into pure horror. Slendytubbies is a 2012 horror game released by ZeoWorks. It's a twist on the 1997 British show Teletubbies. It basically ruins the show's warm and engaging visuals and warps them into something straight out of a horror movie. The game is a Slender Man-style survival horror experience where players explore eerie, foggy landscapes in search of custards. But the thing that really messes with the player's mind is the fact that they're being hunted by horrifying, corrupted versions of their childhood comfort characters. Teletubbies, the once cheerful characters, are now grotesque-looking disfigured monsters with the most horrific backstories. What makes Slendertubbies so unnerving is how much it messes up with the material source. The cheerful Teletubby theme we grew up with is replaced by everything opposite of that. All four of the Teletubbies have some sort of monstrous physical trait that stands as a stark contradiction to their actual character. Tinky Winky, the main antagonist of the first game, has the most corrupted-looking character design out of all of them. He has a massive deformed mouth and uses it to induce a blood-curdling scream. He's also a hostile entity who kills the other Teletubbies as a result of some infection. Slendytubbies initially started as a parody horror game. It quickly gained a cult following and spawned multiple sequels, memes, and plenty of sleepless nights. It's proof that even the most innocent childhood memories can be twisted into something terrifying. Tom and Jerry Train Tracks. Tom and Jerry is known for its over-the-top jokes and slapstick comedy. It's one of those shows that just about everyone knows and has some kind of connection to, regardless of age. But despite the humor, there's one episode in the series that takes a shockingly dark turn. A surprisingly grim contrast to the otherwise chaotic and maybe too hilarious cartoon series. The great thing about Tom and Jerry is that since the show's format is episodic, there isn't much that can be considered canon. Or on the flip side, maybe everything is. Each episode tells its own self-contained story completely separate from the last, or at least we hope so when it comes to the infamous Train Tracks episode. The episode, officially titled Blue Cat Blues, starts with Tom falling hopelessly in love with a white cat. He does everything he can to win her over, but fails, ultimately having his heart broken when she chooses a wealthier, more glamorous suitor. Tom spirals into a deep depression and gradually loses his will to live as his efforts prove futile. By the end, Tom sits on train tracks consumed by despair. Jerry joins the cat in a rare moment of solidarity, reflecting on his own failed relationship. The episode ends with a haunting fade-out as the train rapidly approaches the two. The dark implications of the scene, paired with the grim tone, leave a lasting impression that feels completely out of place in an otherwise light-hearted series. Level 4. 25 Ways to Kill Yoshi. 25 Ways to Kill Yoshi is as violent as it sounds. It's a dark comedy video featuring the Super Mario character Yoshi, portrayed as a plushie, meeting his end in a variety of gruesome ways. Despite the cartoonish and exaggerated tone, there's a strong chance the video was aimed at, or at the very least consumed by a younger audience. Unfortunately, this wasn't exactly appropriate for that demographic. The video, created by YouTuber Shonyboy, shows the Yoshi plushie being subjected to increasingly horrendous scenarios to act out the titular 25 Ways to Kill Yoshi. With over 250 million views, it's safe to say it was watched by a massive audience, including many impressionable people. Shonyboy employed various methods to bring Yoshi's plush form to a violent demise. From throwing it in a blender to microwaving it, stabbing it multiple times, and even setting it on fire, the video spares no effort in depicting over-the-top violence. While the addition of Super Mario sound effects adds a somewhat lighthearted layer, it doesn't change the main theme of destruction. Comment sections on the original video are filled with remarks from viewers who admitted they watched it as children as a way to seem edgy or rebellious. The exaggerated violence and dark humor turned the video into something of an early internet relic full of minor controversies. Demon Lady Carb Commercial. Carbs are the enemy for sure, but what happens when big companies take that idea a little too literally? There's a wild commercial from 2001 that a lot of people on the internet remember for seriously freaking them out as kids. The ad starts off pretty normal, like any typical early 2000s commercial. It's bright, over the top, and packed with people acting way too happy. The scene is set at a baby shower with a group of women sitting around congratulating one of their friends. Then the camera shifts to two women sitting off to the side. One of them is holding a plate of hors d'oeuvres and casually asks the other if she's tried the food. The other woman politely declines. She further explains that she's on a diet and is keeping off carbs.
These are really good. Have you tried one?
Oh, I shouldn't. I'm on this whole low-carb thing.
Oh, I read about that.
This probably would have been enough to get the carbs bad message across, but here's where things take a completely unhinged turn. The camera pans back to the woman with the plate, and out of nowhere her face transforms into this horrifying, twitchy demon. She starts aggressively insisting the other woman eat the pigs in a blanket, and her face is oddly glitchy, distorted, and way too much for a commercial about snacks. The whole demon sequence is jarring and feels totally random. The ad probably would have been just as effective, if not better, without it. Some people say they threw it in for shock value, but instead of selling snacks, they just ended up traumatizing a generation. Drag Me to Hell. Drag Me to Hell is a movie that starts off like a generic supernatural horror flick. However, by the time it ends, you're not only left shocked, but also completely defeated by its conclusions. The film follows a loan officer who denies an old woman an extension on her mortgage simply to show her colleagues she's not a pushover. That turns out to be a very bad decision. Unfortunately, the old lady she messes with isn't just some harmless elderly lady. She's a, quote, gypsy who places a horrifying curse on Christine, the main character's name. This ends up setting off a terrifying chain of events where Christine has 3 days before being dragged to hell by a demon. Christine does everything she can to fight the curse. She tries animal sacrifices, seances, and even digs up the old lady's grave to return the cursed button she was given. And by the end of the movie, we see that she has likely managed to succeed. Everything seems to get back to normal for her. She's reunited with her boyfriend and is ready to move on. But just as things start to settle down, she realizes that she never actually got rid of the cursed button. And then, in one of the most downright brutal horror movie endings ever, Christine is literally dragged to hell. She is pulled into the depths most atrociously right in front of her boyfriend, who stands there frozen in fear. It's a gut-wrenching ending that completely shatters any sense of hope the movie builds. The visuals, the screams, and the sheer cruelty of it all make it so disturbing that it's bound to stick in your brain for years. Dead Silence. Dead Silence is a horror film that sticks with you and leaves an eerie feeling long after it ends. The movie was released in 2007 and follows a guy who goes back to his unsettling hometown to maybe try to figure out the reason behind his wife's brutal death. What he ends up discovering instead is the story of a ventriloquist accused of murder. Her name was Mary Shaw, and she was silenced by the townsfolk before she could defend herself. And now, in order to carry out her revenge on the townspeople, she's back as a vengeful spirit. Mary Shaw's revenge is terrifying in all the worst ways. She turns her victims into dolls and only kills those who scream when she reveals herself. Most of the movie consists of the main character trying to curb his own sense of fear so he doesn't scream. This proves to be way more difficult than it sounds, considering how he's dealing with a cursed spirit. The tension that slowly builds up in the movie is extremely unsettling. It amps up exponentially when there's an impending jump scare and you're convinced that screaming would literally bring the cursed spirit to you. The eerie silence accompanied by Mary Shaw's absolutely lifeless-looking dolls are bound to stick with you, especially if you're someone who grew up with a fear of dolls or ventriloquist dummies. Disturbing SpongeBob. SpongeBob SquarePants can easily be marked as a show with some of the strangest yet funniest humor in cartoons. However, sometimes even the little square sponge goes a bit too far in his antics. There's this one scene in the SpongeBob episode Can You Spare a Dime that can be considered a primary example of a joke going too far. The episode basically revolves around Mr. Krabs accusing Squidward of stealing his dime, which makes the latter leave his job at the Krusty Krab in a fit of rage. SpongeBob runs after him to convince him not to do that. He tries to reason with him, saying his job at the Krusty Krab is supposed to make people happy. Of course, that doesn't faze Squidward, and he refuses to relent. Sensing Squidward's crankiness, SpongeBob tells him to come find him whenever he needs any help. That's when the off-putting scene happens, where SpongeBob hugs Squidward and assures him that the two of them are like brothers, only closer. The way he puts that in its own right is extensively creepy, but what he does next simply makes it too disagreeable to watch. He bunches Squidward's shirt up and gestures at both their hearts physically connected, seemingly hinting at the only closer aspect of his previous dialogue. It could be considered funny in certain contexts, but the entire scene just screams unwanted affection and awkward interaction. It's not only painful to watch, but also makes viewers highly uncomfortable. What's even more unsettling than the cartoon itself are the fan-made parodies that often go way too far. A prime example of this is the SpongeBob Sick Pants video. SpongeBob Sick Pants is a crude and unsettling 18-plus parody of the otherwise family-friendly cartoon. Despite its brief runtime of only a few minutes, the video features a sequence of some of the most bizarre events ever, and that's saying something considering how everything happens in such a short interval of time. The video is definitely not for younger audiences. It's filled with dark, disturbing visuals, adult humor, and extreme violence, including and cannibalism. It's unnecessarily bloody and fully leans into its edgy early internet vibes. It's definitely an uncomfortable watch for anyone who unexpectedly comes across it. Level 5. Doshin the Giant. Doshin the Giant is an old Nintendo 64DD game released as a launch title for the Japan-only console. It was later revamped and released on GameCube in Japan and Europe, but never managed to make its way to North America. But for those who've actually gone through the trouble of acquiring the game and playing it, they'll know it's not as happy-go-lucky as it appears. In fact, Doshin the Giant is a strange and unnerving game that leaves players with an odd sense of emptiness. That's not to say it's a bad game. On the contrary, it's actually a pretty soothing sandbox, perfect for a casually long game session. The kind where you just want to play something without thinking too much. Regardless, the game has certain aesthetics that make it feel very odd and uncanny. The titular character Doshin is a sun incarnate who takes the form of a massive giant. Every morning when the sun rises, Doshin is summoned to an island called Barudo. At said island, Doshin has to move around, look for inhabitants, and help them with their menial tasks. As a giant, these tasks can be anything ranging from planting massive trees and terraforming the area to simply stomping volcanoes shut to prevent eruptions. As a result of his good deeds, Doshin receives the island's love in the form of hearts. The more hearts he gets, the bigger he grows in size. However, there's a surprisingly dark flip side to this seemingly peaceful game. There are times when the islanders grow ungrateful or frustrated with Doshin. When they do that, they start bombarding him with hate in the form of skulls. That's when Doshin shifts to his alter ego, Jashin, and does the opposite of spreading love. Jashin is a demon with wings who is able to launch fireballs from his hands. Jashin is basically evil and thrives on hurting the islanders and burning their houses down. He has a creepy face that becomes stamped on one's consciousness the more the game goes on. While Doshin and Jashin are complete opposites, there's something unnervingly odd about Doshin too. He's just too weird and uncanny to fully embrace as a good guy. Jack in the Box Super Bowl commercial. There's a fine line between joking and bad taste. And while the Jack in the Box Super Bowl commercial series titled Hang In There Jack was pretty funny for the adults watching, it struck a very different chord with some of the younger audience. The Hang In There Jack ad campaign during the 2009 Super Bowl takes a bold and somewhat traumatizing approach. It features the company's beloved mascot getting hit by a bus in the middle of a busy road and, as it seemed, not being okay. The first episode of the campaign ends there with a prompt on the screen urging viewers to visit hangintherejack.com for updates on Jack's condition. In the next ad, Jack is rushed to the operating room by a group of healthcare officials who don't seem to be taking the situation as seriously as it appears. What follows is a series of funny but bizarre moments during Jack's hospital stay. One scene shows him unable to fit inside the CAT scan machine because of his massive head and protruding nose. Another shows a doctor using a hot medical glue gun during Jack's surgery. It was all in good fun for some, but definitely traumatizing for the younger audience. The entire ad campaign ends with Jack gaining consciousness the instant his assistant Phil takes over the company and proposes to change its name to Fill in the Box. While the campaign was a bold move in marketing history, it's hard to forget just how unexpectedly heavy it was for something promoting fast food. For kids who just wanted their burgers and fries, watching their mascot fight for his life on national television might have been a bit too much. Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street. The 1984 horror slasher film A Nightmare on Elm Street marked the beginning of one of the most legendary yet haunting slasher franchises in history. The series' iconic villain, Freddy Krueger, was the literal textbook embodiment of the phrase nightmare fuel, given his unique ability to torment people in their dreams. Krueger was known for his disturbing physical traits and equally disturbing backstory. He wasn't your typical demon-like entity who thrived on jump scares and over-the-top screaming matches. He was a true antagonist in every sense of the word. Freddy Krueger was characterized by his signature striped sweater. He also wielded weapons in the form of bladed gloves and had a horrifically burnt face. He would invade the target's dreams at the time they would be the most vulnerable and would attack them relentlessly. The face-off would undoubtedly become very bloody, with the victim obviously losing their lives. Freddy Krueger wasn't a silent killer. That's exactly why he felt so unhinged. He reveled in the psychological torment he inflicted on his targets. He would hunt them in a cat-and-mouse chase, would give them a sense of security before inevitably attacking them viciously. Freddy's backstory was even more disturbing than his present crimes. He was a murderer who was burned alive by multiple victims' parents. But even death couldn't stop his maliciousness, considering how he would later come back as a supernatural entity based on revenge. The idea that someone so evil could transcend death just to torment more people is as sickening as it is scary. For fans of horror, Freddy Krueger is a legend. But for others, he's a lasting reminder of so many sleepless nights that would absolutely end up with a bad dream or two. Level 6. King Ramses' Curse. Courage the Cowardly Dog was perhaps one of the most traumatizing cartoons of our childhoods. Its surreal art, absolutely diabolical storyline, and the increasingly nightmarish characters were simply too much to handle, and yet somehow it was one of the most intriguing shows ever made. So much so that we couldn't stop watching, no matter how unnerving it got. One of the most memorable parts of the series is known as King Ramses' Curse. The plot of the episode isn't just scary, it's downright gruesome, definitely not something meant for younger audiences. The episode begins with two grave robbers hiding a cursed artifact near Courage's home in the middle of nowhere, naturally. The artifact is a slab with different symbols carved on it that screams danger. Courage, being Courage, digs it up and brings it back to the Bag household. When he hands it to Eustace, he realizes that the slab is worth $1 million and needs to be returned to where it came from. The ever-greedy old man realizes the slab could be worth $1 million and immediately refuses to let it go. When night falls, things take a terrifying turn. Eustace refuses to return the slab to authorities, and that's when the ghost of King Ramses shows up. The CGI is so unnervingly realistic that you start questioning if this was ever meant for kids. Ramses sways eerily from side to side and demands in a monotonously chilling voice, "Return the slab or suffer my curse." The line alone is bone-chilling enough to be carved into memory for years to come. Despite the multiple warnings, Eustace refuses to give up the slab without compensation. Ramses unleashes multiple curses on the Bag family, each much worse than the last. Eventually, the slab is returned to its rightful place, but not without Eustace suffering the horrific consequences of his actions. He is violently consumed by a swarm of locusts and reduced to another carving on the very slab he was hoarding. Some might say he was very naughty. Baby Einstein. The Baby Einstein video franchise was one of the most iconic things many of us grew up with. It was marketed as an educational series for babies that claimed to basically make them smarter. They advertised that Baby Einstein videos would boost the intelligence and cognitive development of babies. The videos featured simple home videos with cute visuals, classical music, and a touch of adorable puppets and toys. In fact, these videos gained so much traction among parents that the company was eventually acquired and distributed by Disney itself. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect way to give children a head start. However, the reality was far more complicated. A 2007 study claimed that Baby Einstein videos did the polar opposite of what they promised. According to research from the Journal of Pediatrics, babies who watched videos like Baby Einstein experienced delayed language development compared to those who didn't. Contrary to popular belief, this study argued that giving more screen time to infants actually hindered the natural process of language learning. This revelation was a huge blow to the franchise, which had been marketed as a tool for learning for the longest time now. It was also a disappointment for parents who genuinely believed their children were benefiting from these videos. It wasn't long before class action lawsuits were filed, and the company was forced to offer refunds to customers who felt misled. Fortunately, though, the company didn't disappear entirely. The study was eventually reanalyzed, and new data showed that these videos were neither harmful nor beneficial to infants and toddlers. While the damage had already been done, Baby Einstein still went on to become a major name in the children's toys market. A Bad Case of Stripes. A Bad Case of Stripes is a seemingly innocent children's book that, for the most part, delivers a solid lesson to young readers. It teaches about identity, self-acceptance, and how conforming to society's expectations is a surefire way to lose your uniqueness. However, it's also remembered for its absolutely bizarre and unsettling art, along with the occasional eerie plot points. While the book is marketed as a lighthearted story about a girl named Camilla Cream who transforms into strange patterns, it quickly becomes a surreal nightmare as her body morphs uncontrollably. She doesn't just turn into stripes, her skin changes colors and patterns more frequently than a chameleon's. The designs themselves are absolutely nightmarish. Checkerboards, polka dots, and even floral prints, each one more unsettling than the last. But the horror doesn't stop there. The book's premise revolves around Camilla becoming a literal canvas. At first, her skin is covered in chaotic patterns and colors. Eventually, the transformations escalate to the point where she begins morphing into completely unrecognizable objects. One of the most unsettling moments is when she turns into a tangled mass of roots, looking as uncanny as it sounds. She even becomes her own bedroom, with her eyes eerily transforming into windows. Camilla's constant changes driven by societal pressure are depicted in a way that feels increasingly disturbing rather than whimsical. For many readers, A Bad Case of Stripes left a lingering sense of unease, with some even recalling having nightmares about its surreal illustrations and unsettling story. Raka Raka Ronald McDonald. There is some content that's unsettling in its ability to create a nuanced, uncomfortable environment. Then there's content that's so blatantly violent that it doesn't even try to mask its depravity. Raka Raka's Ronald McDonald is a parody rendition of the globally famous McDonald's mascot already known for its pretty uncanny looks. Raka Raka is basically a comedy horror YouTube channel run by twin brothers Danny and Michael Filippo. The twins are known for their edgy sketches and graphic content. Their videos often push YouTube boundaries and are precisely the reason they've had their videos flagged several times. However, despite their troubles with the platform, Raka Raka is widely regarded for having some of the most creative and high-quality productions on YouTube. Their channel's central figure is a violent, chaotic reimagining of Ronald McDonald. Far from the family-friendly and inviting mascot that represents the fast food chain worldwide, this Ronald is a bloodthirsty, homicidal maniac who will stop at nothing to protect his favorite restaurant, which is, naturally, McDonald's. Nearly every skit on the Raka Raka channel involves over-the-top, dramatized action sequences where this unhinged Ronald unleashes his aggressive, hyper-violent tendencies. Whether it's outright killing threats to McDonald's or even cannibalizing his victims, the character is unapologetically disturbing. Although these videos are made in good fun and are meant to be comedic, their grotesque violence and the sheer unhinged nature of Ronald's behavior have so many of Raka Raka's viewers feeling uneasy. For some of its audience, the boundary-pushing antics are entertaining for sure, but for a lot of them, they're deeply unsettling. That's not very surprising considering the videos really tread impossibly close to the line between parody and pure malevolence. Level 7. Utsu Musume Sayuri. Utsu Musume Sayuri is a short, anime-like film that pushes the boundaries of theater and art to the extreme. It was released in 2003 and was apparently made as a student project. The 3-minute short film is essentially a nonsensical amalgamation of surreal characters and horrendous voice acting that leaves a lasting impression on anyone who watches it. While the video might lose its initial creepiness after a few rewatches, the first experience is genuinely unsettling. There's no real story to the short film. The official premise simply states that Sayuri is a curious creature who lives off her husband. It gets even stranger when you realize that Sayuri is a deformed humanoid monster-like being who is literally parasitizing a man identified as her husband. To make things worse, Sayuri isn't alone. She's joined by what seems to be her parents, who look just as freaky and revolting as she is. Sayuri herself can only be described as a massive tangle of limbs with a long, black, whip-like appendage sticking out of her. Her parents, depicted as worm-like creatures and a gigantic head respectively, urge her to strike. According to the official premise, striking is Sayuri's sole purpose in life. What does that mean? We may never know. Frankly, the entire video is as nonsensical as it is disturbing. It leaves a bitter taste in the mouth and feels like a fever dream. While some viewers argue it's meant to be some form of social commentary, nothing can be said about it. And considering how chaotic its visuals are, the theme of the video is nearly impossible to decipher. Combine that with the diabolical voice acting and the whole experience becomes even more baffling. Pico's School. Pico's School is a 1999 Flash game that was considered one of the most coveted Flash games of its time. It's often credited as the game that gave Flash games the momentum they had afterwards. It was also praised for its surprisingly sophisticated and revolutionary design, especially for that era. However, there's a darker aspect that makes Pico's School more notorious than famous. The game was inspired by the devastating mass shooting at Columbine High School. The shooting resulted in the deaths of over 10 students and left more than 20 injured. It was considered one of the deadliest high school mass shootings in the US and shook the entire country for years to come. Pico's school shooting, being based on that, made the game not only a grim reminder of that tragic day, but also made it very dubious. While the game's premise isn't a verbatim retelling of the tragedy, it draws heavy parallels. The main character of the game, Pico, is a student who basically takes it upon himself to stop his classmate Cassandra from rampaging and killing everyone in the school. The game begins with Pico and his classmates in class learning about apples and bananas. Cassandra, the goth girl of the class, suddenly stands up, denounces the American education system, and begins her killing spree. Her first victim is the teacher. Her death is portrayed so violently that the game cuts to a blackout screen with the message, "Your computer is unable to process the immense amount of blood flying around the screen at the time." The gameplay kicks off as Pico ventures through the school to stop Cassandra and her lackeys, who are terrorizing everyone. The lackeys spare Pico only because Cassandra apparently has a crush on him. As Pico progresses through the levels, he discovers that Cassandra has brainwashed her lackeys. She's revealed to be an alien in disguise plotting world domination. The final boss battle pits Pico against Cassandra's alien form, using his own weapons to defeat her. While the game's visuals and simple controls don't immediately scream dark, the disturbing implications of its premise are undeniable. It's unsettling how a game with such a grim backdrop was so popular that nearly everyone seemed to have played it at some point. Joy Junction. Joy Junction was a children's television show that aired in the 1980s. It was primarily categorized as a Christian program that was pretty wholesome for the most part. The show aimed to educate young viewers about kindness, empathy, the power of sharing, and the values of faith. In fact, if we overlook what happened later, the show was actually extremely enlightening for many people. The face of the show was a dummy named Marty. Marty was ventriloquized by a preacher named Ronald Brown, who used the puppet as a way to grab children's attention and consequently teach them Christian values. In retrospect, this becomes really disturbing considering how, a few years into the show, Ronald Brown was arrested for some of the most harrowing accounts of crime. He and his colleague, Michael Arnett, were arrested for their involvement in deeply troubling online activities that completely contradicted everything Joy Junction represented. They were not only in possession of illegal material, but were also actively planning to commit horrendous crimes against unsuspecting people. Some of these crimes, as recorded in Brown's journal, ranged from kidnapping to cannibalism. Thankfully, they never acted upon these disgusting impulses, but the fact that Brown had once been seen as a figure of trust and moral guidance made the entire ordeal even more disturbing. The joyful persona he faked on Joy Junction stood in stark contrast to the absolutely vile allegations against him. It left the world to question how such a duality could even exist in a person. The revelations also forced another realization. Nothing in media is as it seems. Entire personalities can be easily fabricated, making it more important than ever to approach media figures with caution. This disturbing case is a clear reminder that we need to stay sharp and media literate, especially in the current age where appearances can be so easily misleading.